So this is 09:55 hours GMT on Friday, the 11th of December, 2020. This is part A of the Khoodeelaar campaign, world exclusive diagnosis of Fleet Street. Fleet Street currently has 10 daily titles, but the agenda, the narrative, is less than one. Fleet Street essentially constitutes the daily kind of perpetration of organized lies under cover of press freedom and so on. The narrative that the Fleet Street papers, so-called, they're separate titles, but they are actually running the same theme, the same agenda, the same narrative. And the narrative is one of denial, of misinformation, and propaganda and brainwashing the gullibles. Gullible is spelled Gullibles. Gullibles in this context are the collections of people who are targeted by these Fleet Street titles. Although the contents of the Fleet Street titles reach wider audiences due to other factors. One copy of the item is read by more than one person due to the circulation habit and distribution kind of patterns. And also they are repeated by the broadcasting outlets like the BBC and the Sky News and ITV and Channel 4 News. They don't tell the story about anything that is of real importance to ordinary people, the real agenda of the ordinary person's life. That is not the agenda that Fleet Street papers ever follow. And that applies to more than 200 years of Fleet Street papers. Although in the actual collection, currently there are 10 titles. The Daily Mirror and its so-called stablemates, the Daily Express and the Daily Star, and then the Boris Graph, Financial Times, the Daily Mail, the Scum, the Guardian, and the thing called the I newspaper. Some of these are in context, in historic context, very new in terms of the context of the last 230 years or so of Fleet Street. But essentially, the Times remains in circulation, which is the oldest of the lot in that lot list. But the Times, although owned by Rupert Dirty Digger Murdoch, has never been telling the truth to the readers. It has always been kind of condescending, patronizing, talking down to the society generally. And although it has been known to have been called the newspaper of record, it is nothing of the sort. Newspaper of the record, that thing ceased to apply to it long time ago. And especially the current kind of adventure by Boris Johnson, careerist adventure. It's Johnson who has been styling himself as a kind of person that the gullibles, the ordinary people brainwashed, would buy the image. That is what he has targeted. And the Conservative Party is essentially a party backed by the gullibles. And his strategy has been for 30 years at least, if not for longer, to fashion himself as a Churchill, based on the image of Churchill. sold to the gullibles at the time. So everything that appears in the Fleet Street titles about the regime that is fronted by, or the cabal that is fronted by Boris Johnson, is prompted by Johnson's kind of script writers and script kind of confectors of the day, the previous day, previous 24 hours, working out some kind of pretext on which to present himself as being engaged in the fantasy war that he kind of superimposes on the situation and blame somebody else, blame the world. And it's, for example, this week, the so-called world-class kind of world-first vaccination program that allegedly started in Britain ahead of the rest of the world, this is the claim, has been designed as V-Day. Now, V-Day is very much a phrase that was made kind of popular after the event in the 1940s during the Second European War. It's not the World War because the war was not caused by the rest of the world, Africa or Asia. So it's accurate to say it's a European war. And if Japan's involvement alters the kind of description, then it's only partial. Japan did not represent the Asia, majority of the Asia anyway. So when they kind of indulged in a grotesque self-congratulation season or years, they used the term V-Day. It was secret before the end of the hostilities, and it became public only after the end of the hostilities. So V-Day became very much used as a phrase. And Johnson, who is the shallowest individual around, grabbed hold of the myth of the myth of the myth and constructed himself as the author of books about Churchill, which is absolute false. He wasn't around. He wasn't even born. So he never witnessed any of the events that he claims to have authoritative comment or opinion or views or insight on. He has not said anything original and he has not said anything correct. It's all absolutely bogus kind of construction of an image for Boris Johnson to be shown as kind of subliminally reproducing the alleged adventures and success of Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill's success depended very much on his success at lobbying the American presidents. And the details of the lobbying and the very arduous lobbying that Churchill had to undertake are all chronicled and can be looked up. So the V-Day is being used by the Fleet Street morons to aid and abet the urge of Boris Johnson to be seen as a go-getting, doing things prime minister, which is absolutely not happening. So the Fleet Street newspaper's first failure is to fail to tell the truth and to point this out and to refrain from repeating this V-Day kind of narrative and stupidity. But they cannot be restrained because they are zombies in that sense, and they are addressing the majority of their kind of patrons and readers or whatever, who they think are definitely zombies and gullibles in that sense. Which is why there is this serious contradiction every day. And the place where the most brazen sets of contradictory information, quote, news, is found is the Daily Mail. On the one hand, it says about the virus and the vaccine that it's all absolutely perfect. The vaccine has arrived and it's going to deliver the solution, and the virus is going to be finished, defeated. The virus has been given a personality as if it were an enemy in military combat against the British. It is all back to the 1940s and the fantasy. So they're using the term virus, defeating the virus. That is the kind of concept they have been using. But that's not right. Because unlike the enemy, they still don't know the virus in the sense of how it works. They cannot monitor the virus and set up an espionage operation or series of operations to go behind the enemy line and all the other things that could be done if it were an army or armies of opposition, states or forces. And Fleet Street, as we have been exclusively pointing out, one of the things we have been exclusively pointing out, apart from the fact that we are doing the world exclusive diagnosis all round against and on and of these lying outlets, they have not been telling the readers or the people who are consulting the titles for information and fact-checking purposes and content analysis. They're not saying how the virus works. Of course, they're saying what so-called experts and so-called interested kind of businesses like the Pfizer and other vaccine producers and the various spokespersons on behalf of the cabal fronted by Boris Johnson are saying. But they're not saying A to Z, where the virus kind of starts affecting the person and what happens when the virus affects the person. And as they are not saying this, the absolute majority of the people in this country, people affected by the kind of contents of these stupid tabloids and Fleet Street titles, don't know what actual initiative, independent personal initiative they could make in order to either reduce the chances of getting infected or dealing with it and overcoming it by their own initiatives. In addition to, of course, the supposedly actively continuing provision of the healthcare and whatever. And healthcare, as we have been saying in this country, again is based on fantasy and untruth and lying and denials. Because although the National Health Service was established as an idea, mainly kind of worked out in the 1940s and obviously forced, if you like, the government of the day of the state. These were the events of the Second European War and the catastrophe or series of catastrophes that prevailed and affected people, millions of people. So when the National Health Service was actually begun to be put together, it was all the correct thing to do. But they left out the main component, which is that it was a dynamism, that it wasn't a static thing. It wasn't a thing that stayed unchanged from day to day. That everything that the National Health Service needed to provide was prompted or dependent on, or was dependent on the need of the people who needed service, the health service. And that failure to treat the NHS as a dynamic entity, organization, meant that whatever claims they were making about it being at the National Health Service, the claim was absolutely misleading, to say the least, to say it politely, say it generously. And as the evidence in the pandemic over the last 10 months or 12 months or whatever, 10 months, let's say, shows, disproportionate numbers of people were allowed to be neglected by the whole system, the care homes and the health service organization, the hospitals. And disproportionate numbers of African and Asian persons lost their lives. And this is in addition to the lack of dynamism throughout the NHS. This is the kind of fixed attitude of hostility and denial and neglect, all based on racism. And anyone who may doubt the brazen, rampant state of racism in this country today need only look at the encounter on the telephone, on a live radio program broadcast by LBC with the presenter Nawaz Majid. Now, Nawaz Majid is one of the mental slaves who has been attacking opponents of racism in order to establish himself as another Trevor Terrible Phillips. And yet, he had what he said was 15 minutes of an encounter with a man who appeared to have the name Oswald. We shall come to the reason why that Oswald name is very significant. And this happened 4-5 days ago, I think. And we noticed this particular broadcast only in the last 24 hours. Now, this caller called Oswald, if that is the name, even if it isn't the actual name, the person expressing the views to Nawaz about Nawaz's own kind of ethnicity represented Oswald Mosley, or represented what Oswald Mosley would represent if Mosley were around today. Although Majid Nawaz kept saying to this caller, Oswald or whatever the name was, that he, Majid Nawaz, was born in England. And so by birth he was English. And this caller, Oswald, let's say within quotation marks, was resisting that and refusing to allow Majid Nawaz to call himself English. He insisted on calling Nawaz as Pakistani. Now, Nawaz Majid is not Pakistani in the sense that he may have parents who come from probably Pakistan. I don't want to say that at this stage without double checking the actual parentage or whatever backgrounds of Majid Nawaz. He could be Pakistani, he could be from an Arabic background, he could be from an Iranian background. I don't want to definitively refer to him as belonging to any of those. Essential fact is that he kept saying that he was born in England. So therefore, by birth, regardless of his ancestry and backgrounds, he was English, English-born, English person, or British. And this is something that would be very difficult to convince people of. Whenever Majid Nawaz has done anything in the last 20 years to make outrageous comments against Pakistani people, Bangladeshi people, or Indian people, or Muslims generally, he has been defended. He has been immediately, instantly defended and backed by mainly indigenous and other white persons. And here he was having to defend himself as an English-born English person. And nobody, as far as at this stage we can establish, nobody called or nobody came forward, or nobody has actually commented on Majid Nawaz being right and that Oswald and that Khoodeelaar being wrong. So that shows that racism and racist denial is not just aimed at ordinary people who are supposed to be kind of not English because of their origin, not because of the attitude they have to society, to life, to community, to other people, to ordinary outlook, but only because they are relatable to people from African or Asian origin or backgrounds, or parents, grandparents, whatever. It would be difficult to convince people that Majid Nawaz was denying the most fundamental racist denial that exists in this country, which is why so much injustice is being done every day, every single second, without that being recognized. And the biggest problem socially, societally, in Britain today being Friday the 11th of December 2020, remains the problem of racism. But even worse than that is the problem of denying the existence of the problem of racism. That is even worse. And Majid Nawaz is one of the people who denies the existence of racism when it suits his career. I mean, he has been given platforms on the BBC, on Sky News, and of course LBC, and other so-called mainstream racist controlled and racist edited outlets in this country as one of the very few acceptable kind of person of, let's say, African or Asian kind of origins, and as a Muslim or as a former Muslim, because it is probable to find an incident or so that refers to him having denounced Islamic faith or Muslim faith as a background of the faith. So he is in struggle to establish his Englishness or establish his claim to be equal to England-born white persons. That was the argument that came across in that exchange. Now that's fundamental, which is why we have run a part of the transcript. We ran the transcript earlier today, and we posted part of the transcript to the exchange. Not completely, but to highlight the essential contents of the exchange for evidence, for diagnostic purposes. And when the Daily Mirror is a tabloid. Now, tabloid is not just about the size of the paper, but about the contents. That it is shallow contents, and it is accepted that it is also racist title publication. And the second page of the Daily Mirror, or the third page, the second page is taken up by an advertisement by Tesco. So the page 3 of the Mirror today has got a display promoting Jennifer Lopez and Kylie Minogue, both being described as 50 years old and looking fabulous. And on pages 4 and 5, they've got maternity scandal in NHS history. They're calling it the greatest maternity scandal in NHS history. Now that is a lie, because the maternity disasters affecting African and Asian backgrounded mothers are uncounted. So they are not including in history those disasters in the NHS history, but we can cite that admission of a scandalous behavior by NHS institution as illustration of what we have been saying about the failure to make the NHS run as a dynamic operation, a dynamic service entity, which takes into account changing kind of events and needs every single day. And there is no audit, there is no accountability demand for that failure of the NHS. That is something that is completely and conscientiously and consciously left out by us in this kind of particular focus, because we are not talking about the money. There has been, until the virus kind of appeared in the UK, the NHS was not very kind of popular with the conservatives and the big business and the privateers, because the ideological difference makes a difference of trillions of pounds worth of looting that the big business and the privateers can make. Essentially, the NHS has never been delivering people the services with equal respect. The equality that Majid Nawaz was being denied by his caller. And Majid Nawaz knows the equality is a myth. There doesn't exist equality of treatment for people of African and Asian origins, and especially for Muslims, in the institutions in this country. As we have said, one-to-one, when a person, whatever their own ethnicity and background may be, when a person, either a nurse or a doctor or an ancillary staff in the NHS system, has a one-to-one encounter with a person very ill or a person too ill to defend themselves one-to-one, if that person, that NHS staff or hospital person, decides to be negligent or decides to be careless, then the life of that person, that ill person, is on the line. And that is the reality day to day. And the NHS has nothing in place to actively ban, let alone to monitor this that goes on every day. And there is nothing in the newspapers about that. There is, of course, pieces like this one in the Mirror. Susie Boniface has made a kind of name for herself as the campaigner for the nuclear weapons test veterans. And today's piece is about acknowledging their sacrifices by the British government, the British state, or the Queen. That's the main focus she is kind of promoting. And there is no such campaign that the Mirror has done against racism, let's say. There hasn't been anything like that dedicated campaign by the Mirror. And they're, of course, talking about the mass test of the schools. And they're now talking against about the Crown, the series, The Crown. And they're saying in there that inventing is not fair. It's playing with lives. Now that is true. But would the Daily Mirror say the same thing about racists inventing fantasies and fabrications and fakery in order to deny equal and fair service to the people in need of treatment and care? People with African or Asian backgrounds, identities, or Muslims. And I got a 2-page piece on the demise of Barbara Windsor, loss of a true legend. TV superstar dead at 83 after a 6-year battle with Alzheimer's. And there are other kind of so-called Patel demos ban will make UK look like Hong Kong. The right to protest against wrongs is at the heart of our democracy, says Paul Routledge, who is given the platform telling it like it is. The right to protest against wrongs is at the heart of our democracy. So naturally, hardline Home Secretary Priti Patel wishes to abolish it. She plans to introduce draconian new laws to outlaw demonstrations that affect places such as newspaper printers, the courts, or the House of Parliament. Protests outside nuclear power stations and other critical infrastructure will also be banned in legislation giving wide new powers to the police. And of course, we have discussed this before, Priti Patel and her kind of neo-right agenda. And there is a piece about Boris Johnson facing court battle over Patel. Boris Johnson's controversial decision to clear Home Secretary Priti Patel of bullying could be challenged in court. Lawyers acting for the Senior Civil Servants Union, the FDA, is the FDA is called, actually FDA is misleading because F refers to the USA, but never mind. FDA is First Division Association, I think, have started the process which may result in an application for a judicial review. Now that is far-fetched. It may not get to the court because there may be kind of compromised and a deal may be made. That has to be seen. But judicial review is not the same thing as a verdict against the person litigated against. So judicial review is itself misleading. Most judicial reviews, what is in detail, also known as judicial review of executive action. If Boris Johnson is the subject of a judicial review, which has to be kind of staged after going through several stages. That is, first stage is called permission, application for permission to do a judicial review, which gives the story away, which gives the myth away. Judicial review is an obstruction. Judicial review itself is not obstruction, but the holding of the judicial review by the High Court is obstructed by the High Court bureaucracy. So whenever anyone says about a judicial review in England, that is how it should be seen. There is a complete myth. The absolute majority of judicial review applications against executive actions cannot be held by the victims or by the aggrieved party or parties, because it is an obstacle course that makes absolutely impossible demands on the applicant. So therefore, most judicial review grounds may exist, claims may exist in truth, but they never get to be done, processed by judicial review being actually done of the executive action concerned. And the Daily Mirror is stupid, typically stupid, and is not making this clear. It is just dropping the phrase judicial review to suggest that there is a heavy duty legal challenge against the behavior of Boris Johnson in excusing Priti Patel's bullying. That is misleading. And that is the kind of thing that the Daily Mirror and the Fleet Street kind of do to the gullibles, to brainwash the people that actually read these papers or are among the main kind of subscribers and buyers of these titles. So there is a 15-year-old boy who presented a 6-minute talk about sleep study to the United Nations in Geneva yesterday, Thursday, 10th of December 2020. And a piece by Rose Wayne Jones. She is described as standing up for you and your family. Now that is a lie, because the use of the word family is completely misleading. The statistics, the demography shows that almost half of the adult population are alone, single persons, and not members of a family or don't live with a family. And that lie is perpetuated to the detriment of the people who need service and who are denied service because of the exclusion, leaving out that category, that group. And she's saying that Tories don't realize universal credit £20 is vital lifeline to many. Now they want to scrap that too. Now that is typical kind of commercial pitch that the Daily Mirror is making there. When she calls the Tories, that's what she means. She's appealing to the readers and the buyers of the Daily Mirror who are not Tories and who are mostly, supposedly, Labour Party supporters. She's not talking about the poverty that is imposed daily, not just by the Tories, but by the Labour Party, where the Labour Party is in power to do any decision making affecting people and people's income and people's livelihoods and people's status and needs about housing, employment, schooling, and so on. In the case of a council, that is Labour Party controlled council, say Tower Hamlets, the list can include the fact that there are thousands of people in every area, every borough, or people living or existing within the kind of boundaries of a particular English borough council. Thousands of people are being targeted for harassment by various other parties. And that is being treated by the councils being in denial. And the same policy by the police being in denial. And there is no access to the courts against that kind of harassment. There is no remedies available. There is no effective, timely, and really accessible remedies provided by any of the regulators, because the regulators really don't exist that could deliver that kind of access. And there is no support from the locally elected councils or councillors or members of parliament. And if there are any so-called non-profit organizations, the voluntary groups, etc., many of whom are kind of given benefits as being registered charities, they don't make any difference. And so therefore there are areas in London, for example, in most of the London, East London kind of areas, there exist, not exclusively in East London, but East London has got the majority of sink estates. This phrase sink estate is not heard about currently. But the sink estates persist and are destroying lives of people, individual peoples, families. And it's a theme that warrants absolute urgent attention, but it's not being given the attention. So diseases, quite apart from and separately from the virus, which has only arrived in this country in the last 10 months or so, there are many well recognized illnesses and health conditions caused by sink estates environments. And there is no evidence, there is no reporting of the sink estates by the Fleet Street papers. So if there is no report, then there is no knowledge societally, publicly, about the facts or the extent of the implications of damage to lives that these sink estates are causing and doing. So in our decades-long engagement in fact-checking, evidence research, empirical studies, which are all ongoing and have been ongoing for decades, we can exclusively reveal literally thousands of examples of Tower Hamlets Council being totally in denial and being aided and abetted by the so-called prosecuting authorities. The police don't take action against most crimes that take place in Tower Hamlets. Taking that as an example, Tower Hamlets Borough, but it could be applied equally in the case of the police, in the case of the prosecution authorities, so-called, to Newham, to Hackney, to Lewisham, to Southwark, to Lambeth. These are not, Lambeth, Southwark and Lewisham are not East London, they are South London boroughs. But they've got many things in common in terms of the behavior of the local councils. The council cabal, the council clique, for example, in Southwark. Southwark council clique is fronted by a confirmed agent of big business interests and a colluder of capitalist exploitation and anti-democratic kind of forces. And he was named in a piece published in February 2018 by the World Socialist website, which also included Haringe and a number of other, including Lambeth, Labour-controlled councils, and it accused them of being in bed with big business and capitalist and construction conglomerates that were engaged in degenerating communities. So back to Tower Hamlets, and if any evidence seeking person wanted to examine the behavior of Tower Hamlets Council over sink estate, because sink estates are not just estates that are in serious decline and neglect by the council, but sink estates are sites and locations of daily acts of terror being perpetrated by gangs of criminals let loose on those estates by the local councils and the local police. The police only come into action if those gangs, which in many cases in Tower Hamlets are not white, they're mainly Bangladeshi, and that these criminals are only accosted or confronted by the police if the targets of their crimes happen to be white persons. Otherwise, they don't care. So the narrative that has been run from the mainstream media, Fleet Street, and the mainly racist kind of comments made by racist and ignorant persons, while MPs, for example, a number of MPs that were from seats in the north of England, so Yorkshire area, which had the incidents of reported Pakistani origin men as gangs targeting white girls for rape, prostitution, and sexual abuse. They have said, these persons making the statements against these gangs have said that the police were kind of deterred by a sense of anxiety over allegations of racism if they targeted these gangs. Now, that is an absolute lie, because there is no evidence, either anecdotally or in terms of the actual published opinion, by any citable, reliable, accessible, identifiable source, whether themselves of Asian origin or African origin, is immaterial. There is no evidence that people in the Asian community or among the Asian population, if you like, or among the Pakistani or the Muslim population, would discourage the police from taking action against criminals who are of Asian or African origin. There is no evidence. So this is a double, treble racist kind of denial. And this is then extrapolated, this lie, in justifying post facto, that is, after each criminality perpetrated on the Cinque States by Asian gangs against Asian residents. And this goes on. And none of the Asian elected councillors on Tower Hamlets Council says anything about that at all. As we have said about Ajmal Ahmad, the schoolboy at the Langdon Park School in the Poplar area in Tower Hamlets, who was murdered by a gang of Bangladeshis, and the Ajmal himself was a Bangladeshi. And the Tower Hamlets Council absolutely said nothing. Now, that was a very serious example. That was one very serious example of Tower Hamlets Council failing its safeguarding duties towards children. And we have updated that kind of evidential failure by Tower Hamlets Council when we have talked about the events surrounding these three girls from the former Dainford School who were first reported after they reportedly crossed from Turkey into Syrian territory in 2015. Now, those children, those three girls, were children in 2015, and they had been children when they had been undergoing whatever process they were put through by whoever. Now, the Tower Hamlets Council had been and still is in receipt of considerable central government funding under this duty to safeguard children. And there is no evidence the Tower Hamlets Council bothered about these three girls, or indeed bothered about the situation at Langdon Park School or any other school where children, almost overwhelming majority of the children where there are Bangladeshi children, mainly boys, but not exclusively. It is possible to find examples of Bangladeshi girls involved in crimes against one another or crimes of targeting other Bangladeshi girl or girls, like Ajmal Ahmed. There is no evidence that Tower Hamlets Council has taken any action, any effective action about safeguarding children in the context of the overall need for action to be taken, program to be carried out, substantial programs to be carried out, significant programs to be carried out. One of the things that the elected mayor post does is mysteriously disappears all idea of accountability by the council. Because as we have said, the current incumbent in the corrupt post of elected mayor, John Biggs, the first executive act that he perpetrated after the May 2018 election, where he, quote, retained the post of the elected mayor, executive mayor. Elected mayor is also referred to as executive mayor. That is to say, it is the incumbent in the elected mayor post who does the executive leadership of the given council. So when Biggs got re-elected, so-called, at the 2018 election, the first executive decision he made was to openly bribe all the Labour Party councillors with hardly any exception. And the fact that he decided to do that must be explained as being evidence of the post being essentially a corrupting post, because he faced no criticism, let alone opposition to that act. And the previous such corrupt bribery and criminality that Biggs carried out was in June 2015. Shortly after Biggs became elected for the first time to the post of elected mayor. That was just under 2 months following Richard Morey, election commissioner, ousting Lutfur Rahman from that position in the judgment that Morey published on the 23rd of April 2015. So Biggs did that criminal act and abuse of the funds of the council by writing off millions of pounds worth of debt owed to the council by the rich mass center based in the Bethnal Green Road, in an area misleadingly also called Shoreditch. That area is not in Shoreditch, but that's what it is called. But it's in Bethnal Green Road, just opposite the junction of Brick Lane and Bethnal Green Road. And the rich mass center has been treated thus with the abuse of power by bigs, whose action illustrate the fact that he can take action, make decisions that do not need anybody else in the council taking part. Whereas in the case of the severely under threat woman stranded in Bangladesh for more than 14 years, bigs refused to help that woman, who was taken against her will from her home in London in May 2001. And Biggs was told about the urgency and he refused. He never committed anything in writing saying the refusal, but he lied about meetings that were planned to be held with him after the so-called adult kind of social care personnel lied and lied and lied to deny that woman the support that she desperately needed. Biggs did the same thing when he refused to help a group of children who had been under severe threat of abuse over a number of years in Tower Hamlets. And more than one of those children will remain traumatized for the rest of their lives as a result of the abuse they suffered while the Tower Hamlets Council failed to do the duty and help them in any way. Now, what Biggs did about those two cases, those two, let's say, sets of cases, had been done by Tower Hamlets Council while Lutfur Rahman was in the same post as Biggs became installed in from 11th of June 2015. So both the woman stranded in Bangladesh and being abused and the children being under severe risk of abuse, I cannot describe the details of the abuse or the threat of abuse in public for the safety of those children. But the fact that these children were either being abused or were or had been under severe threat of serious abuse was known to the council since before Lutfur Rahman got installed in October 2010 in that post as elected mayor. And the council was refusing and council was failing. So when Lutfur Rahman was told about the very serious things, wrongs being done by Tower Hamlets Council employees. Lutfur Rahman had the legal duty to immediately start urgent action to help the women dangerously stranded in Bangladesh and the children being under dangerous kind of threat of abuse in Tower Hamlets itself. Lutfur Rahman did no such thing. He didn't do any action. So the current campaign, current as of today, that is Friday the 11th of December 2020, more than a decade since Lutfur Rahman got in as the elected mayor in Tower Hamlets. Lutfur Rahman has the audacity to have his so-called supporters publicize so-called arguments for the post of the elected mayor in Tower Hamlets. And in the propaganda, Lutfur Rahman's supporters, so-called, are lying. And they're saying that the mayor system, elected mayor system, is the best system in Tower Hamlets because the alternative, which was the council being run by a leader with councillors having significant say on issues and the behavior of the council, conduct of the council. As far as we can see, there is no public awareness campaign being made by anybody other than our campaign at this time about the serious criminality that the elected mayor post is. And we are not even going chapter and verse through the evidence that Richard Morey included in his summary in the judgment that he published on the 23rd of April 2015. Because it is not just the unfit individual, the immoral individual, and the corrupt individual that may get elected mayor. It is also the unprincipled nature of the post. Because there is nothing to this day, despite the fact that there is a kind of constitutional framework or the legislative framework around the election of an elected mayor. There is no framework for basic democratic, let alone social accountability by the holder of that post. So therefore, for example, Lutfur Rahman, who has been described without any exception as the Bangladeshi Muslim mayor of Tower Hamlets, his regime let down most of the Bangladeshis in the borough that needed direct service from the council on specific issues, individuals as well as families, as well as groups. And in addition to those two cases or groups of cases that I have referred to in this update, Lutfur Rahman allowed the Sink Estates criminality and the gangsters criminality to take place without any abatement, without any action whatsoever. So let's look at what he did. Now, here is an exchange of emails. Now, this one, there is a whole thread of emails, let's say, and I shall be reading only the parts that I can explain here in the context of this edition. It's dated, let's say, in May 2013. That is exactly a year and a week before the 22nd of May 2014 election that Lutfur Rahman was the subject of the petition about. So this one is from the Khoodeelaar campaign to, the name is Afsana Begum, and it's copied, circulated to Kerry Jeeves, Carol Saich, on Monday the 13th of May 2013 at 11:39. And it says, subject is 11:40 hours Monday, 13 May 2013. This is being sent to you as part of the verification of the facts. Dear Miss Afsana Begum, please confirm what Aman Dalbi has said or done and what Alibor Chaudhry has said or done since your particular email. This is being sent to you as part of the verification of the facts. Your email had stated, please rest assured that your concerns have been given the highest priority possible. Please, viewer, notice this, I'm repeating this. Afsana Begum said to me in May 2013, please rest assured that your concerns have been given the highest priority possible. It is being discussed at the most senior level of the council in order to bring about the most positive outcome. That email was dated 19th of April 2013, not May, that particular one. And this is 13th of May 2013, just short of a month. That is what I said to her in that email I sent at 11:40 on Monday, the 13th of May 2013. So I continued in the email. What is the most positive outcome? Is it for the council or is it for the party affected by the council's conduct concerned? I continued. If Aman Dalbi has said or done anything, why is it that he has not communicated that to me? If Alibor Chaudhry has said or done anything that amounts to fulfilling the statement contained in your email, as I have quoted above, then why hasn't he communicated that to me? In order to avoid any room for any doubt as to the focus, the direction, the orientation, and the legal and the constitutional law implications of this email, I'm sending a copy of this to Miss Carrie Jeeves in context, as I am also copying in Miss Carol Saich, SAICH, on the assumption that she is still working as part of the executive support personnel in the council. And Afsana Begum's email, timed 5:27 p.m. on Friday, the 19th of April 2013, had said, Dear Mr. Haque, Further to Councillor Ahmed's email below, I am able to allow you of the following. It is not clear what she means by I am able to allow you of the following. Councillor Ahmed has brought your matter to the attention of Aman Dalby, Corporate Director for Development and Renewal. The Corporate Director has advised that he will investigate your concerns and will update Councillor Ahmed when he is able to provide a satisfactory response. Councillor Ahmed understands that Councillor Chowdhury has taken a lead in addressing your concerns. Councillor Ahmed has advised Councillor Chowdhury and his PA to advise on how this matter can be progressed. He will be right to you. He will be right to you, not he will be writing to you. Again, when he has a full response on the matter. I apologize that I do not have any further information for you at this stage. However, I will write to you again when I have any new information to hand. Please rest assured that your concerns have been given the highest priority possible. It is being discussed at the most senior level of the council in order to bring about the most positive outcome. Now, the email she refers to from Ohid Ahmed is not of any substantial help. He says that he is not a lead member. And he says that, but he repeats what Afsana Begum has said in other words. He says, Ohid Ahmed, as far as I can see, highest importance, he doesn't use the, he says, as far as I can see, highest importance has been given to your issue. I tried to find out this morning, but senior officers either in a meeting or on leave. Now, that is not substantially dealing with the thing, and the fact that Afsana Begum and Ohid Ahmed use generic words, your matter, your concerns, hides the details. It's not one issue. It's not a singular. And the fact that I went to the trouble of giving them verification opportunities and reminders and clarifications is only as the tip of the iceberg. I have carried out investigative, analytical, constitutional, judicial kind of research at all times that would exceed, and I repeat, that would exceed the abilities available to David Panic, who charged £20,000 for 1 day of his retention by the Manchester City Football Association or football organization in relation to their hiring him over an appeal they needed to lodge against a ban imposed by a Europe-based, European kind of football or sporting regulator or authority. So I was giving the equivalent of more than one David Panic's time at all times. And I'm doing this today. And I've been doing this forever. In order to give the council, the Tower Council, two things. One is the benefit of the doubt, and the other is the evidence. And at no time, about no subject, has anyone in post in Tower Hamlets Council, either as elected mayor or as leader of the council or as a director, whether Aman Dalby or somebody else, has ever produced a single iota of evidence to challenge the veracity of the evidence that I have represented and I continue to represent. This is much more than a world exclusive. It is more authentic and authoritative and directly sourced than anything that the two reporters for the Washington Post could actually cite, because they were not doing the thing directly interrogating Richard Nixon or his particular cabal of advisors and operatives and spies about the Democratic National Office and the bugging operation that they did, and the plotting and the cover-ups and all the rest of it. I am reporting directly on ongoing work that I had done years before and have been following years since. And I'm able to report today that the current incumbent in the post of the corrupting post of the mayor, that is John Biggs, has behaved in the context of all this evidence on all the cases exactly as corruptly as Lutfur Mandi had done, exactly as irresponsibly, as illegally as Lutfur Rahman had done. So the case for calling for an end to this corrupting post of elected mayor is made by the evidence. Not only because I personally hold a clear position opposed to the operation of imposition of an elected mayor, because that is undemocratic generally, unaccountable generally, antisocial generally, corrupting generally. In the cases that I have referred to in significant kind of clarity, these are representative of the behavior of Tower Hamlets Council. Of course, for legal reasons, I cannot name other cases, or I cannot even paraphrase other cases, except to say that I have dealt with various people in post in Tower Hamlets Council over decades. And when I say people in post, I mean at every level. So the kind of availability and the width and the volume and the extent of evidence is very, very significant and substantial. And this experience is unique in the sense that nobody has been caused to spend so much time. Nobody else has been caused to spend so much time, give so much energy, and undertake so many efforts by any other known local council or central government department, because the work of establishing the facts, identifying the duty of the council, identifying the way to solve the given matter, all this work has been done by me, had been done by me, and is still being done by me in this update as well, because I'm clearly setting out what happened, what went wrong. And what will continue to go wrong unless, in the context of the campaign to scrap the elected mayor post, unless this post is scrapped, people in Tower Hamlets and people in similar comparable kind of boroughs like Newham, Hackney, Lewisham, will suffer. Suffer not because there is no funding available to the council to render the service. Suffer because of the corrupt mindset, the prejudice mindset, the negligent mindset on the part of the elected mayor, post holder, as well as the relevant personnel who to kind of take the same line in order to suit the corrupt purpose and aim of the corrupt post holder, of the corrupt post, of corrupt mayor, of the corrupt mayor. Here is a kind of topical reference to Croydon Council. Croydon is not an inner London borough, it's a outer London borough, let's say, South London. And it is called London Borough. And its structure has been with a leader and ordinary councillors and cabinets and whatever, not as an elected mayor, if you like, lumbered with an elected mayor post. And its leading kind of power exercisers and abusers have been Labour Party affiliated, and they have been crooks. The crooks have landed Croydon Council and the Croydon electors with anything up to £2 billion of worth of debt, while they have been neglecting serious services owed by Croydon Council to people, individuals and families and children across Croydon. So instead of saying that end corruption by Croydon Council, the Lib Dem opposition so-called and the so-called campaigning inside Croydon outlet have been totally, absolutely in denial of the existence of Tower Hamlets and Newham and other disaster areas lumbered with elected mayor corrupt post. They have been demanding that the way to solve Croydon's corruption is to make it more corrupt by having an elected mayor. And they've got, amazingly, they've got significant number of people signing their alleged kind of petition. So the problem is not only that the Labour Party kind of linked Tony Blair, imposed that legislation, enabling the imposition of the elected mayor, both for at the expense of London as a whole and also for individual boroughs. The problem is that the Labour Party, as I have been saying, is intellectually bankrupt. It's not just Jeremy Corbyn who was intellectually very challenging or challenged, but the entirety of the Labour Party in Parliament is intellectually bankrupt. If it isn't bankrupt, it is also morally bankrupt. Because Keir Starmer who is in place as the so-called leader of the Labour Party, has been kind of imitating Johnson's cabal and has been colluding with cabal of Boris Johnson. I mean, Keir Starmer has made an on the record kind of statement immediately after Joe Biden got in, or Joe Biden was publicly acknowledged as having won the election in the US. Starmer had a go at Barack Obama. And Starmer said that Biden would have won or would have had better success as the candidate for the Democratic Party at the 2016 election. But Starmer blamed Obama for not pushing for Biden to be the candidate. Now that shows Starmer's stupidity, because it was not up to Barack Obama to push for anyone. The Democratic Party decision to have Hillary Clinton as the candidate was not anything to do with Barack Obama, and Barack Obama would have been unsuccessful had he challenged Hillary Clinton's kind of lobby that was so powerful and overwhelmingly powerful within the Democratic Party and outside. That shows Starmer is an idiot. Starmer doesn't know the basic amount about the American political parties and American kind of situation that he should know. So Starmer was being ignorant and also peddling a racist kind of line. Not very dissimilar to Boris Johnson's racist underestimation of Barack Obama. Because Boris Johnson imitated Donald Trump's racist descriptions of Barack Obama. Not in full, but in sufficient detail for Johnson to come across as a racist, imitating Donald Trump on Barack Obama's identity and race and ethnic background. Starmer did the same, only slightly shorter and infrequently, let's say, or less frequently. So the Labour Party in this country is not being led by somebody who is in possession of the necessary knowledge and is himself a racist, which is why he has not so far made any statement condemning the racism of the Conservatives or racism in society. And this is the same drawback, this is the same problem that the Labour Party, in terms of the leadership, suffers from about democracy. Starmer hasn't made any headway. Starmer has not made any impact whatsoever on the public's kind of attention, if you like, about the disastrous failures of the Johnson-fronted cabal in dealing with the virus. Starmer has made contradictory kind of statements and stances. There is no narrative. And that lack of narrative relates to the same thing, same failure over the 75 years since the idea of the NHS was established. The Labour Party bureaucrats and self-seekers claim that they are the best defenders of the NHS. They are the founders of the NHS. That's not true. They could not found anything if they didn't have the idea of the thing. And the idea came from a non-Labour Party person, as did the idea of the so-called welfare state. Of course, the Clement Attlee-led first government after the 1945 was in place to install or take into implementation any program. But the idea of the program came from someone else. And the fact that Attlee established the welfare state, the NHS, both of those, did not equate or equal the actual delivering of the welfare state and the NHS, as I have been saying before. It is a dynamism, it's a dynamic kind of process that had to be kept ongoing, and it hasn't been kept ongoing. So in the cul-de-sac, we support the NHS, and NHS is safe with us. NHS is not safe with the Tories. That's a cul-de-sac. That's an end of the road. That is a blocked road. It doesn't move. It is not measured by the people who needed care in the past or were given the care in the past. It depends on the now and the future. How people at the point of need now are treated or are mistreated or are not treated at all. These are concepts, these are ideas that the Fleet Street papers today are not talking about. They have never talked about this. And they will never talk about this. There needs to be a movement for a just NHS, a just welfare state, a just society. That movement doesn't exist in this country and has not existed in this country. Not in the way that it has any traction. Of course, there are people, all manners of people doing all manners of slogans about justice, fairness, equality. That's not the same thing. Because in order to make the decision-making forces, the agenda-setting forces, to change their behavior and their agendas and their priorities and the narrative, you need to force them, not just preaching to them or preaching generally in public. The only way decision makers, people exercising power, do the right thing that they need to do is when their own careers and their own kind of opportunities and their own benefits come under attack. That is not a moral statement. That is a practical statement where we are examining the behavior of people acting without moral kind of priority being the leading force in the decision making. So, for example, in the campaign, that the Khoodeelaar campaign represented at the time when the Crossrail Hole project was in need of being halted. We didn't go to the government and say that please do it. Please listen to us. Of course we did that. But we didn't rely on that. Of course we gave the evidence. And we gave the narrative and we gave the demands. But we had to intervene in order to make it very clear to the local council that if they didn't oppose the whole, then they would lose their positions as councillors and as so-called representatives of the community electorally, and the council would be completely altered and changed. That is very difficult thing to actually aim to do, and we did that. And it was necessary to spend time, energy, effort, expertise, and give up so many things for a very long time. But we did get across to the council that they will be sunk, and we were doing the sinking of the council. That is the measure of a campaign, how you do campaign. You don't just tell them to do something. You take steps to sink them if they are going to sink the community. Which is what was happening. And in the case of the HS2 project, and the people across the line from, let's say, from Houston to Birmingham, there are literally thousands of people campaigning against the HS2 project.